topics we will be discussing include Katrina's and La Ofrenda.
Let's get started.
The Day of the Dead is a holiday that is celebrated on November 1st and 2nd. It is originated and is observed mainly in Mexico, but also in other places, especially by people of Mexican descendants. Although it is associated with the Catholic celebrations of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, it has a much less solemn tone and is presented as a feast of joyous celebration rather than mourning. Multi-day vacations involve family and friends gathering to pay their respects and remember friends and family who have passed away. These celebrations can have a humorous tone as the celebrations recall funny events and anecdotes about the deceased.
Mesoamerican cultures had similar views towards death, practicing similar ceremonies. To the Nahua, the indigenous peoples of Mexico and El Salvador, death was only the dispersing of the human body, but the soul, considered a divine creation, moved into the afterlife. For the Nahua people, the soul went to Chikunamictlan, known as the land of the dead that was ruled by Mictlantecutli, the lord of the dead, and his wife, Mictecacihuatl. The celebration roots began in Aztec, Mayan, and Toltec cultures. In Aztec mythology, Mictecacihuatl, known as the Queen of Mictlan, or Queen of the Underworld, her role was to keep watch over the bones of those who had died. In artwork, she is often pictured with her mouth open, symbolizing her ability to swallow the stars and brighten the day.
I like to think of the origins of Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, as being this cultural mashup. So think back to the days of the Aztecs and the indigenous peoples of Central America, and you've got traditional feast days. You've got a culture that celebrates death and the dead as going on to a better place or a different place, moving on through your life. You know, death is part of life. And so they had gods and goddesses that were in charge of death, as many cultures do, many mythologies do, you know, whether it's Roman or Greek or Aztec. And so they had feast days. They had feast days that celebrated the Day of the Dead. And then you have Spanish colonization. So then you have Catholic, Spanish, Hernan Cortez coming over and colonizing this area. And so you have the Catholic saints, and you have traditional holidays like All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. So it's this cultural mashup. It's two societies merging. So you have the Aztecs celebrating, and their traditional celebrations were in July. And then you have the November All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day. So what happens when indigenous peoples are colonized? Things merge. So all of the Aztec gods and goddesses became associated with Catholic saints. And then they took the celebration of the dead and kind of merged it with All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. And so you have aspects of both things. You have honoring the dead, talking about this time where souls can come to earth and remember and revisit. And so they're mashed together. So that's how I like to think of it as coming about. And now it's a Mexican national holiday, so it's a huge celebration in Mexico, and it's kind of transferred into other nations and into the U.S. as well.
But how did the celebration start? When the Spanish conquered Mexico, their intent was to convert the population to Catholicism. Tearing down pagan temples and replacing them with churches, the Spaniards brought Catholicism to the new land in an effort to replicate the evangelization of pagan Europe. Pagan offerings of food and wine honoring the dead during the spring and autumn equinoxes became a part of the new Catholicism. Pope Boniface IV established All Saints' Day, which was celebrated in May to honor saints and martyrs. Then, Pope Gregory III moved the day to November 1st. And finally, Pope Urban II established All Souls' Day on the 2nd of November to honor the dead baptized as Christians. But the Day of the Dead is not an unhappy or sad time. It is a festive time to remember and cherish the memories of those who have gone on before.
dicen el negro llorona, negro pero cariñoso. Todos me dicen el negro llorona, negro. Pero sabroso, yo soy como el chile verde, llorona picante, pero sabroso. Ay, de mi llorona, 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 y llévame al río. De mi llorona, 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 y llévame al río. Tápame con tu rebozo, llorona, porque me muero de frío. Tápame con tu rebozo, llorona.
La Catrina is a skeleton woman who wears a large French-style hat over her skull and is the Mexican representation of death. Its original name was La Calaveras, and it was born as a burlesque critic of classism in Mexican society. Its meaning is that death makes us all equal, rich and poor. This represents the attitude of Mexicans to death. The smile, the funny poses, and the colors of the dress speak of the acceptance of this transition to a better place, and of the joy of receiving the beloved souls that return for a few days.
One of the most iconic images in Day of the Dead celebrations is La Catrina, originally depicting the skeleton of a woman used as part of a political leaflet. The artwork, created in early 1900, was an illustration by artist José Guadalupe Posada, telling the story of a woman ashamed of her origins, trying to emulate the European ladies of style. Posada's calaveras became images tied to the Mexican traditions of Dia de los Muertos. The images stand as a social commentary that Mexicans attribute to death itself. Poetry written for the Day of the Dead are known as literary calaveras and are intended to humorously criticize the living while reminding them of their mortality. Literary calaveras became popular during the second half of the 19th century, when drawings critical of important politicians began to be published in the press like those by Posada. They were the beginning of present-day Dia de los Muertos decorations of skulls and skeletons with their grins and ability to portray human activities, and they reflect Mexicans' understanding of death without fear or judgment. Another artist, Diego Rivera's 1947 mural, Dream of a Sunday Afternoon, cemented the image of La Catrina into the consciousness of the celebration from Mexico to the United States.
Talking about the artwork and the skull motifs or skeletons. So again, with the Aztecs and Mayans and many indigenous cultures, you have that kind of skull motif over and over again, talking about different gods and goddesses in the underworld and life itself. And then keeping that motif and keeping that, so you have these traditions that have been carried on. And then talking about in Day of the Dead, you have like Posada, Jose Posada, who was an artist, an illustrator, and so he kind of used that skull motif a lot, and he's doing it, think political satire and cartoons. So he's kind of poking fun, that death is the great equalizer. So looking at people as skeletons, and you're going to see that in Old World Europe too. That kind of play of the dance with the dead. So it's just the skull motif has kind of been on and on and on. So Posada iconized that by creating the Katrina, the kind of first image of this Katrina. So he's doing political satire, and he's talking about these ladies that were kind of denying their Mexican heritage and dressing up as European women and being very fancy. So that was like the first Katrina image. And then later on, with Diego Rivera in 1947, he created this very famous mural, and it had the Katrina, La Katrina, the big figure of this beautifully dressed woman as a skeleton. And it's kind of a self-portrait looking at himself as a child holding her hand. So again, that kind of just reinforced that image. And then you have things like sugar skulls, which are a really traditional treat. It's just caught on, and it's kind of now pop culture. It's everywhere.
El altar de los ofrendas during the Day of the Dead festivities, food is consumed by living people and given to the spirits of their deceased ancestors as offerings, or ofrendas. Tamales are one of the most common dishes that are prepared for this day with both purposes. Pan de muerto is a type of sweet bun shaped like a bun, topped with sugar and often decorated with bone-shaped pieces of the same dough. The sugar skulls display colorful designs to represent the vitality and individual personality of the deceased. Besides food, drinks are also important. Historically, the main alcoholic beverage was pulque, while today families often drink the favorite drink of their deceased ancestors. Other drinks associated with the festival are atol and champurrado, hot, thick, and non-alcoholic dough drinks. Agua de Jamaica, or hibiscus water, is a popular herbal tea made from flowers and leaves of the Jamaica hibiscus plant, Hibiscus sabidifera, known as Jamaican flower in Mexico. It is served cold and quite sweet with lots of ice. The ruby red drink is also known as hibiscus tea in English-speaking countries.
Sugar skulls are made using molds filled with a mixture of granulated sugar, water, meringue powder, and the icing made from powdered sugar and food coloring. They can be decorated with sequins and other inedible objects. They can be as plain or as ornate as the creator desires. Though sugar skulls are associated with Dia de los Muertos, sugar art was brought to the New World by Italian missionaries in the 17th century. Mexicans learned from friars how to make them. The folk art style of sugar skull creation is symbolized by big happy smiles, colorful icing, and glittery adornments. Small sugar skulls represent the children who have died, which is celebrated on November 1st, while the larger sugar skulls represents the adults, with the celebration taking place on the following day, November 2nd. Dia de los Muertos has been celebrated in a number of animated films, including Dia de los Muertos by Wu Kazoo, The Book of Life, a 2014 animated film directed by Jorge R. Gutierrez.
Where am I?
Welcome to the land of the remembered.
Don't try to take it all in at once.
And the story goes on.
This is incredible.
Epic fiestas every day.
All you can eat churros.
Welcome to the land of your ancestors.
Miguel?
We're your family.
Your skeletons!
And most recently, Coco, an animated feature film from Pixar. These family films are the latest way to tell the story of the celebration of the Mexican holiday of the Day of the Dead and pay respect to Mexican culture. Tradition plays a large part in the celebration of Dia de los Muertos.
One of the big important factors in celebrating is traditionally a home altar. And if you don't do it at home, they can be found in businesses and along the streets and in schools and everywhere. But that is the place where you're inviting the souls home to visit. So you save your money up, you go to market, you buy all these things that you need to create the altar, whether decorations or special foods or ingredients that you need. And you go home and you get your family together and you create this altar. And usually the altar is multi-level, so it's representing the underworld, earth, heaven, and you have traditional things on it. So you have pictures, are very important, pictures of your lost loved ones to encourage them. It's like a homing beacon, encourage them to come visit home. Flowers, the marigolds are hugely important. Again, they're called the flower of the dead, and again, they're lighting the way home.
In Spanish, the ofrenda, or offering, is set up to remember and honor the deceased. But before the altar is assembled, the house must be clean, because a very important visitor is coming. The ofrenda is typically set on a table and covered in a fine white tablecloth, followed by the papel picado. Several levels are set. The top level with saints in the crucifix, and for each deceased relative, a candle is set, lighting their way back. The light of the candles, called ceras or waxes, symbolize Jesus Christ reborn and faith. Flowers, representing the fragility of life, are placed on the altar. Salt and water quench the thirst of the returning souls, tired from their long trip. Incense or capal is burned to carry prayers to heaven. But this celebration would not be complete without the food.
So the families are going to be making all their guarded secret recipes of mole and tamales and pan de muerto and things like that, and they're going to have them all out on the altar again to feed the travelers. But what happens, the food doesn't go to waste, obviously. The souls aren't actually eating it, so all the visiting family and the family themselves partake of that at the end of the celebration. A traditional bread is pan de muerto, or bread of the dead, and it's a small individual, like round loaf, and it has a little special quality to it. It's decorated with a cross made of bones. So, and that's just, it's one of those very traditional elements that usually only comes out this time of year.
Mexican folklore embraces the monarch butterfly as the souls of children returning. It just so happens that the Day of the Dead celebration begins at the end of the annual monarch butterfly migration and the beginning of their arrival to the butterfly sanctuaries in Mexico.
You'll see the images of butterflies over and over again. And many people know about the migration of the monarch butterflies to Mexico every year. And that is said to be the souls traveling back to Mexico for Day of the Dead. So the butterflies are often said to be the actual souls of our lost loved ones traveling around. And that's just, it's become a very traditional element of an imagery of the holiday. A traditional element is the cut paper banners, or papel picado, and that is something that you'll see everywhere, especially on the altars and decorating the marketplaces and everywhere else you go. And the cut paper actually, it represents air, so it's one of the elements. And then it comes from the Aztecs actually. So the Aztecs used to cut bark paper and decorate it for the gods. So that's kind of carried over and become this cut tissue paper, cut paper.
At the cemetery, families spend time cleaning and lavishly decorating the gravesites with flowers and candles. After the returning souls have been greeted at home, families bring picnics to the cemetery and spend the evening visiting, telling stories, singing songs, or playing music during the all-night vigil.
And we're talking about the essence of the holiday. So it's a family time, and it's a time to remember the loved one that you have lost. And when you're explaining that to children or to families, I think they relate to it because everybody's lost somebody. They may think of losing their pet dog, or they may have lost a grandparent. And so you're inviting the spirits home. You're inviting them home. It's this time that we're gonna get to revisit and tell stories and think good thoughts and memories of this person. And then you're gonna celebrate their lives. And you're gonna do it in these ways. You're gonna make food, and you're gonna be together, and you're gonna tell stories, and you're gonna go visit the cemetery. And I think children especially are very accepting of that, because it's like, oh, we get to you know, it's not just something scary that we don't talk about. We talk about it, and we celebrate it, and we remember good things, and we laugh, and we listen to music, and we eat good food, and we're together.
In Death Makes a Holiday, David J. Scull said, "Rather than something to be feared, death is enthusiastically embraced and fully acknowledged as a part of life. As Octavio Paz has noted, the typical Mexican soul chases after it, mocks it, courts it, hugs it, sleeps with it. It is his favorite plaything and his most lasting love." In the end, Dia de los Muertos is a celebration of life and love.